And now the government, one of the big stories today, the government confirming thousands of victims of the infected blood scandal are going to get £100,000 as an interim compensation payment. The recommendation was made to ministers last month by the chairman of the public inquiry that's been set up to examine the supply by the NHS of contaminated blood. This is going back to the 70s and 80s. Andy Evans from Northfield was one of those affected. He contracted both HIV and hepatitis C when he was 5 years old. He now chairs the campaign group Tainted Blood, and Andy is with us. Andy, afternoon, evening.
Good afternoon, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How do you feel about what officially has been announced?
I mean, it's a good start, isn't it? I mean, we've been campaigning for so long now. Some of us, I mean, not myself, I was infected quite young, but some of us for 40 years to get to this point. It's the word compensation that matters, really, at the moment, because we've never had that admission of liability before.
You now feel you've got that because this interim payment sort of lends itself to the government sort of accepting responsibility, doesn't it?
Exactly. I mean, it's really an unprecedented day that this announcement has come through. Tells us really that we're on the home stretch. You know, I mean, the campaign has been such a long fought one that the word relief is, the main one within our community. I mean, while this £100,000 is only an interim payment and it doesn't cover everybody, it's certainly a step in the right direction. And, you know, it's going to be there for people who are at end-of-life care and who are really struggling at the moment so they can set their affairs in order. But, you know, down the line, we hope that this is going to lead to more, compensation for people to be able to actually make a life for themselves if they're still around to do so. And, you know, so many people aren't, sadly.
No, I mean, it's too late for thousands, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking, you know, more than 3,000 people have died from this so far. Of the HIV cohort, of which I'm one, there were 1,200 originally infected, and we're talking about maybe 200 left. So, you know, more than 80% of those have died. And it's a bittersweet day, really, because, you know, we have at last some sort of recognition of liability here, but so many people, including people who I've fought alongside for, you know, decades, aren't here with us to see it.
People needing blood transfusions. And I mentioned 70s and 80s, and here we are in 2022. And people will be thinking, it's just outrageous that it's taken so long.
Yeah. And I think the word compensation has frightened government for a very long time. And the line really since day one has been, you know, we did the best we could with the information we had available at the time. And it's taken this public inquiry to prove that just wasn't the case. You know, they did know more than they were letting on. But, you know, as I say, the scandal, I've said before, the scandal itself of the infections is one thing, but the way we've been treated by successive governments over the last 40 years is another, and in a way, much worse than the original, infections.
Yeah, because around 30,000 estimated to have been infected?
I think that's probably an overestimation. We're talking people infected with hepatitis C through blood transfusions rather than haemophilia now, and we honestly don't know the figure for that. We know the haemophilia figures. We're talking about 4,500 there. You know, people who weren't infected through their haemophilia products, people who were infected through blood transfusions from operations, through anti-D from pregnancies, things like that, may amount to a similar figure. So we're probably talking a maximum 10,000, but, it's still a huge figure.
And there are family members who've lost loved ones,
yes.
I gather, who've still got to wait to hear whether they will be eligible, whether they'll receive anything at all.
Well, that's right. I mean, this interim payment doesn't seem to acknowledge those people at all. We've got compensation of £100,000 for those infected and for those directly bereaved in terms of widows and partners. But, you know, there are so many people left out of this announcement. We're talking people who have lost their children as parents. We're talking about, children who have lost their parents. and the people who have been orphaned from this and people who have lost. I mean, it's always a tragedy, isn't it, when the child dies before the parent? But that's happened in so many cases here. And yes, there's no recognition there in this interim payment. I understand the reasons that they've done it. It's for simplicity and speed of getting the payments out to those most in need currently. But it does sting a little bit for those left behind.
Yeah, and Andy, I mentioned in the introduction that this happened when you were 5 years old. So at the time, it was sort of hard to compute for you. But how has it impacted on your life?
Well, hugely. I didn't know until I was 13 when my parents told me. And the reason for that was because I was developing full-blown AIDS. And I was in hospital for quite a number of years after that until decent treatments came out. But in that time, the side effects of the treatments for pneumonia and, other AIDS-defining illnesses that I had at the time have left my body a wreck. I've got osteoporosis, I've got mental health issues, I've got 2 false hips because of the steroids that they gave me during pneumonia. So it's impacted hugely. Having children was not as easy as it ought to have been because of passing on HIV to my wife. We had to have IVF to stop that from happening. So it does touch every aspect of your life. And for a lot of us, the lucky ones who are still alive, will never be the same as we would have been without these infections.
Do you feel, obviously you've made a life for yourself, but do you feel angry about what's happened, or have you sort of come to terms with it in your own mind and you're just getting on with your life in that sense?
I mean, 40 years of infection is a long time. It's a long time to have to hold on to that kind of anger. So I don't personally. I try my best not to. I know people who do, and it's eaten them up inside, and it's a tragedy, really. But for myself, I've managed to focus that into campaigning and getting some sort of justice for all of this. So I started the Tainted Blood group in 2006 with another guy who was infected with HIV and Hep C, Gareth Lewis, who sadly passed away since then. But having done that, so many other people have managed to come forward and help out with the campaign and find some sort of purpose around all of this. And I hope that's given them some sort of life to build upon as well, because so many were lost before we had some sort of structure behind this. Nobody really knew what was going to happen. And of course, everybody was in fear for their lives. So it's great to get to know other people and share experiences, but also get to the kind of outcome that we've seen today.
Yeah, I mean, that's given you some degree of comfort. And this interim payment sort of also leads you to think that there's more to come. But obviously, health is the number one priority, that the money might give you a bit of additional security. But you'd swap absolute full 100% health for any amount of money, wouldn't you?
Of course. If this had never happened, then I'd rather that than and live a pauper's life than not have this money. Which, I mean, really, if you think about it, it's £2,500 per year of infection, which is really not much for fighting for your life for 40 years. So certainly health is the most important thing, and hopefully at least. For some, the money will make things a little bit easier for them. They won't have to do things that they can now pay for other people to do. Therefore, we hope that it will impact positively on their health in that way.
It's a shocking story. It's just incredible. But Andy, thanks for joining me on the show. Good luck to you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Paul. Good to speak to you. Oh, and also Molly King from Radio 2.
Molly King,
formerly of the Saturdays, yeah.
That's right, from the Saturdays and Radio 2. We'll add Molly King to the list. Andy, good to have you on the show.